There is a heater that can warm your entire home through a bitter winter night on a single armload of scrap wood, not a cord, not a wheelbarrow full, an armload. The kind of pile you could carry in from the yard in one trip without setting it down to catch your breath. It burns so clean that what comes out of the exhaust pipe is barely warmer than the air in your living room, and if you held your hand over the outlet on a cold January morning, you would feel little more than a faint breath of humid air, no visible smoke, no creosote climbing up the inside of a chimney, no black soot staining the siding of your house. And when the fire goes out, the heat does not leave with it. The mass of this heater, sometimes 1,000 pounds or more of stone and earthen material shaped into a long sitting bench, keeps radiating warmth for 12, sometimes 24 hours after the last flame dies. People who have switched to this system report cutting their firewood consumption by 80 to 90%. A man in Montana who heated exclusively with a conventional wood stove for years used to burn through a packed woodshed every winter and still woke up in a freezing house by morning. After he switched, his shed stayed half full at the end of the season, and what remained was enough to last 3 more winters. The design is not experimental. It is not some internet fantasy dreamed up in a garage. It draws on heating principles that kept families warm across Europe and Asia for centuries before anyone had electricity or natural gas or a thermostat on the wall. But in most of the United States today, you cannot legally install one in your home, not because it is dangerous, not because it failed a safety test, because it does not fit inside the regulatory box that was built around factory-made appliances decades ago. That is the story we are going to unpack today, from the ancient roots of this technology all the way to the modern code battles that are keeping it out of American homes. The heater is called a rocket mass heater. The name sounds like something bolted to the side of a spacecraft, but the technology is about as low-tech as heating gets. At its core is a small insulated combustion chamber shaped roughly like the letter J. Wood, usually just sticks and small diameter branches, is fed vertically into the top of the short arm. The fire burns sideways at the base and then roars upward through an insulated vertical column called a heat riser. That column is the entire secret. Because it is wrapped in dense insulation, often perlite or vermiculite packed around refractory materials, the temperatures inside climb far beyond what any conventional metal stove can reach. A typical cast iron wood stove operates somewhere around 800 to 1,000 degrees Fahrenheit inside the firebox. That sounds hot, and it is. But it is not hot enough to do what matters most. Smoke, soot, and creosote, the tarry residue that lines chimneys and starts thousands of house fires every winter across this country, do not ignite until they reach about 1,300 degrees Fahrenheit. Most wood stoves never get there. The smoke goes up the chimney unburned, carrying heat and unburned fuel with it, and the creosote builds up layer by sticky layer until one cold night it catches fire inside your flue. Inside a properly built rocket mass heater, 1,300 degrees is routine. The smoke burns. The creosote burns. The volatile gases that would normally escape as pollution are consumed as additional fuel. What exits the system is almost entirely carbon dioxide and water vapor. Proponents say you could hold a white cloth at the exhaust pipe and it would come away clean. But combustion is only half the equation. The other half is what happens to the heat after the fire does its work. In a conventional stove or an open fireplace, most of the thermal energy rides the hot exhaust gases straight up the chimney and into the sky. According to the United States Department of Energy, an open fireplace loses 80 to 90% of its heat this way. Think about what that means in dollars. For every $100 you spend on firewood, you get about $10 to $20 of actual warmth delivered to your living room. The rest goes up the flue. You are essentially writing a check to heat the clouds. Even a modern EPA-certified wood stove, which is a massive improvement over an open hearth, still sends exhaust gases out the chimney at 350 to 600 degrees Fahrenheit. That is a river of energy leaving your house every single hour the fire runs. A rocket mass heater takes those hot gases and instead of venting them straight up and out, forces them down and through a long winding channel of ductwork buried inside a massive thermal bench or platform made of cob, stone, sand, or pebbles. That channel can run 8, 10, even 15 feet through the mass. By the time the exhaust gases complete their journey and reach the short outlet pipe at the far end, their temperature has dropped to somewhere between 140 and 190 degrees Fahrenheit. In plain terms, nearly every usable bit of thermal energy has been stripped from the exhaust and deposited into the mass. That bench you sit on after dinner is not furniture. It is a battery. A heat battery that charges up in a couple of hours of burning and then discharges slowly, gently, all day and all night long. This kind of knowledge gets tracked down every single week. Methods that worked for generations got dismissed by the modern world and are now being quietly rediscovered by the same people who ignored them. If this is the kind of thing that matters to you and you are not yet subscribed, now is a good time. We are just getting started here. Now, here is the part that makes this story so much richer than a simple stove review. The rocket mass heater did not appear out of thin air. It sits at the end of a very long line of heating innovations that stretches back thousands of years, and nearly every one of those innovations was built on the same foundational insight. Do not try to heat the air. Heat the mass. Let the mass do the work. The Koreans figured this out first, and they figured it out so well that it shaped their entire civilization. Their system was called Ondol, which translates loosely to warm stone. Archaeological evidence from the Korean peninsula places early versions of this underfloor heating system as far back as the Bronze Age, roughly 1,000 years before the Common Era. The design was elegant in its simplicity. A fire was lit in a sunken furnace built into the kitchen, positioned 2 or 3 feet lower than the adjoining living space. The hot smoke from that cooking fire traveled through a network of carefully angled, stone-lined channels running beneath the elevated floor. Stone slabs placed above those channels, called gudul, absorbed the thermal energy from the passing smoke and released it gradually from below into the room. The smoke eventually found its way out through a chimney placed deliberately on the opposite side of the house, sometimes as far as 90 feet from the furnace. One fire cooked dinner and heated the entire living space simultaneously. And because the thermal mass of those stone slabs retained heat so effectively, the floor could stay warm through an entire freezing night on a single evening firing. The Ondol-shaped Korean culture in ways most Westerners never consider. Koreans sat on the floor, slept on the floor, ate at low tables rather than raised chairs, all because the warmest place in any room was the ground beneath your feet. That tradition persists to this day. Over 90% of modern Korean homes still use a form of underfloor radiant heating descended directly from the Ondol. The American architect Frank Lloyd Wright encountered the system while visiting Japan in the early 20th century. He was so struck by the comfort of it that he brought the concept back and incorporated radiant floor heating into some of his most famous buildings. He did not invent the idea. He borrowed it from a culture that had been perfecting it for over 2,000 years. If your grandmother or grandfather used to heat with wood, or if you grew up in a house where someone stacked cordwood against the barn every fall and kept a fire going from October through April, say something in the comments. A lot of you carry knowledge about how families actually survived hard winters that has never been written down in any book, and the comment section here might be the only place it ever gets preserved. If this brought back a memory, tell us about it. The Romans had their version called the Hippocaust, a massive stone structure with a large firebox that pushed hot air through channels beneath raised tile floors. It was brilliant engineering, but it consumed enormous quantities of fuel and required slaves or servants to tend the fire around the clock. It was a technology for public bathhouses and the homes of the very wealthy, not ordinary families. When the Roman Empire fell, that knowledge vanished from Western Europe for nearly 1,000 years. But in the Germanic and Scandinavian regions, a different path was emerging. By the 1500s, during a period of bitter cold known as the Little Ice Age, Central and Northern Europeans had developed the kachelofen, which translates to tile oven. These were enormous ceramic tiled stoves, sometimes stretching from floor to ceiling, built with an internal labyrinth of fire brick channels designed to extract every possible degree of heat from the combustion gases before they escaped the building. You would light a hot, fast fire inside, burning small pieces of dry wood intensely for an hour or two, and the smoke would snake its way through those winding passages. By the time it reached the chimney, the fire brick and ceramic tiles had absorbed the vast majority of the thermal energy. 1 or 2 short firings a day kept a well-built home warm for 12 to 24 hours. The fire brick used in these stoves holds 80% more thermal energy than cast iron, and its heat conductivity is roughly 1/45 that of iron or steel. What that means in your living room is simple. Fire brick soaks up heat fast and lets it go slowly, exactly the opposite of a metal stove, which heats up fast and cools down just as fast the moment the fire dies. Wood shortages during the Little Ice Age drove this innovation. When the forests started thinning across northern Europe and fuel became genuinely scarce, families simply could not afford to waste heat up a chimney. Necessity, as it always does, produced brilliance. Some of these kachelofen stoves are still functioning in European homes after well over 100 years of daily use. The Finns took the concept even further with soapstone stoves, using a dense, metamorphic rock prized for its ability to absorb enormous amounts of heat and release it slowly over the course of an entire day. A Finnish soapstone stove weighing 2 tons could heat a well-insulated home with a single intense fire lasting just 2 hours. These were not luxuries for the rich. They were standard equipment for families who took winter seriously. We spent a long time putting together a guide for people like you. People who understand that the old ways worked and who want all of this information in one place, organized, detailed, and ready to use. If you're watching on your phone or computer, the link is right below this video. If you're watching on your TV, grab your phone and point the camera at the code on screen. Every year, more of this knowledge disappears. This is how we make sure it does not. In the 1760s, a Swedish count named Carl Johan Kronstedt refined the kachelofen concept further, developing a multi-flue system that achieved combustion temperatures between 850 and 1050 degrees Celsius. At those temperatures, the volatile gases in wood smoke ignite and burn off completely. That is the exact same principle the rocket mass heater would rediscover more than 2 centuries later. Modern masonry heaters descended from these traditions can reach combustion efficiencies of 95 to 98%. In ideal conditions, a well-built masonry stove burns a kilogram of wood so thoroughly that only about 20 grams of ash remain. Everything else has been converted to usable heat. Compare that to what happens in a typical American living room. The average open fireplace, the kind millions of homes still have, operates at about 10 to 15% overall heating efficiency. That means 85 to 90% of the energy contained in every single log you carry inside goes straight up the chimney and into the sky. According to one estimate, a conventional fireplace exhausts as much as 24,000 cubic feet of warm air per hour. That is not a typo. It is pulling the heated air right out of your house and sending it up into the cold night, while simultaneously sucking freezing replacement air in through every gap around your windows and doors. You would literally be warmer, in some cases, if you had never lit the fire at all. A modern EPA-certified wood stove is a massive improvement, operating at 60 to 80% efficiency. But even the best ones push exhaust gases out the chimney at temperatures that represent hundreds of dollars of wasted fuel over the course of a heating season. Masonry heaters and their descendants, including the rocket mass heater, close that gap almost entirely. They do not allow heat to escape the building until it has first been captured in stone, brick, and earth. The exhaust that finally leaves a rocket mass heater is so cool that in some installations the outlet pipe can be made of ordinary PVC, a material that would melt in seconds if exposed to the exhaust temperatures of a conventional wood stove. So how did all of this ancient knowledge end up inside a homesteader's cabin in rural Montana? That chapter begins in 1980 at a small nonprofit research center called the Aprovecho Institute, tucked into the woods near Cottage Grove, Oregon. A mechanical engineer named Larry Winiarski, who grew up in old mining camps that ran on massive sawdust-burning furnaces, had spent his career studying combustion physics. After the death of his wife in a traffic accident, he made a personal vow to dedicate his remaining working years to helping others. His focus became the 3 billion people worldwide who still cooked over open indoor fires, breathing smoke that researchers compared to inhaling 3 packs of cigarettes every single day. Drawing on his engineering expertise and his childhood familiarity with efficient fire-making, Winiarski developed the rocket stove, a small portable cooking device built around an insulated vertical combustion chamber that burned small diameter wood at temperatures high enough to consume nearly all the smoke. The core insight was deceptively simple. Insulate the chimney. Keep the heat concentrated. Let the column of hot air draw fresh oxygen in from below with such force that combustion becomes nearly complete. By the mid-2000s, Aprovecho had field stations in 15 countries, from Nepal to Senegal to China, adapting the design to local cooking traditions. Then builders in the American natural construction community made the conceptual leap. If you married Winiarski's rocket combustion chamber with the thermal mass storage of a European kachelofen, you could heat an entire house on almost nothing. A Welsh-born natural builder named Ianto Evans, also based in Oregon, was among the first to publish this combination widely. His hand-stapled booklet, originally printed at a copy shop in Oakland, spread through the permaculture and homesteading communities at a speed that surprised everyone, including Evans himself. By 2006, Evans had gathered a small team of dedicated fire enthusiasts, people who called themselves pyros without a trace of irony, to run experiments and refine the design. Among them were Ernie and Erica Wiesner, who would go on to write the definitive Builder's Guide and teach workshops across North America. The community grew through online forums, hands-on workshops, and a shared obsession with getting more heat from less wood. What emerged was a diverse collection of designs. Some builders used cob, a mixture of clay, sand, and straw, to sculpt their thermal benches into organic flowing forms that looked more like living room sculptures than heating equipment. Others used pebbles for the thermal mass, which made the system lighter and easier to disassemble if needed. Some incorporated heated floors instead of benches, creating radiant warmth that rose from below the way the Korean Ondol had done for millennia. A few ambitious builders even integrated baking ovens into the bell structure, combining heating and cooking in a single compact system. The materials for most builds cost a few $100s at most, sometimes less than $100 if the builder salvaged fire brick from demolished chimneys and found a free barrel. People started building rocket mass heaters in their workshops, their cabins, their cob houses, and then they started measuring the results. A homesteader in Michigan who had been burning 2 to 3 cords of quality hardwood every winter in a high-end soapstone wood stove built a rocket mass heater and immediately cut his consumption roughly in half during the first season. He calculated that with a few modifications he could bring his annual wood needs below a single cord. He also found that his supplemental propane usage dropped by 80 to 90% because the thermal mass held heat well enough that the backup furnace almost never kicked on. At current prices, where a cord of seasoned hardwood runs anywhere from $250 to $500, depending on where you live in this country. Dropping from 5 cords a year to 1 or less represents savings of $1,000 to $2,000 annually, not counting all those hours of splitting, hauling, and stacking you no longer have to do. But the most thoroughly documented success story belongs to a man named Paul Wheaton, living outside Missoula, Montana, in Climate Zone 5, where winters are long, dark, and genuinely dangerous. He built a rocket mass heater in 2013, an 8-inch pebble-style design with a granite-topped sitting bench and a stainless steel barrel, and he has heated his home exclusively with it for over a decade. Before the switch, his woodshed would be packed at the start of every winter and empty before the last snow melted, and he often considered building a second shed to make it through. Last winter, he measured his total firewood consumption at 0.6 of a cord. 0.6. His shed now holds enough wood for 3 full winters. He lights 1 small fire each day, lets the thermal mass absorb the heat, and his house holds at a comfortable 69 degrees Fahrenheit when he wakes up the next morning. No stoking at midnight, no cold floors, no scramble for firewood in February. That is the difference between a system that stores energy in mass and one that creates heat and immediately throws most of it away through a hole in the roof. Somewhere, right now, there is someone in your life who would want to hear every word of this, a sibling who heats with wood and dreads the splitting every autumn. A friend who has always believed the old ways had something that modern shortcuts lost along the way. A neighbor who just opened their winter heating bill and could not believe the number staring back at them. Send it to them. You will not need to explain why. They will understand the moment it starts playing. Now, despite burning cleaner than any EPA-certified stove on the market, using a fraction of the fuel, producing virtually no visible smoke, and generating surface temperatures low enough that a child could lean against the bench without a burn, the rocket mass heater is effectively prohibited in most American jurisdictions, not banned by name in most places, banned by default through the structure of the regulations themselves. The EPA requires that all residential wood heating devices sold in the United States pass a certification process designed for factory-manufactured, mass-produced units. Identical stoves come off an assembly line, get tested in a laboratory across multiple burn cycles with instruments measuring carbon monoxide, nitrogen oxides, volatile organic compounds, and fine particulates, and receive a certification number. Rocket mass heaters cannot enter that process because they are not manufactured. They are site-built, one at a time, from local materials, shaped to fit a specific home. No two share identical dimensions, insulation, density, or thermal mass composition. The testing framework has no mechanism for certifying something that cannot be replicated in a factory. So these heaters exist in regulatory limbo, technically non-compliant regardless of how well they actually perform. Local building codes deepen the problem. Most cities and counties require that any installed heating device carry either EPA certification or a listing from Underwriters Laboratories. No rocket mass heater has ever received full UL safety certification. Without that stamp, most building inspectors will not approve the installation. Insurance companies may refuse to cover a home that contains one. Fines for noncompliance range from $250 in some rural counties to over $5,000 in urban areas, with strict air quality mandates. In worst-case scenarios, homeowners have received mandatory demolition orders, meaning they must tear the heater out of their living room at their own expense. The irony here is almost unbearable. The same regulatory system designed to reduce wood smoke pollution effectively forbids the cleanest burning wood heating technology available to ordinary people. Fewer than 10% of American households heat with wood, but according to research cited by the National Association of Home Builders, those households account for more than 40% of residential structure fires, and the overwhelming majority of those fires involve commercially produced, laboratory-tested, government-certified appliances. The old, uncertified stoves, the smoky iron boxes that predate the 1988 EPA rules, are still perfectly legal in millions of homes across the country, as long as they were installed before the regulations took effect. Nobody is knocking on doors to confiscate those. They are grandfathered in, quietly pumping visible smoke into their neighborhoods winter after winter, while the rocket mass heater, which operates at temperatures so extreme that creosote never gets a chance to form, sits on the wrong side of a legal line. It had no part in drawing. It is a little like banning electric cars because they were not built at a horse stable. The rocket mass heater is very likely safer than many of the certified stoves it is not permitted to replace. Now, in fairness, and this deserves to be said plainly, a poorly built rocket mass heater can be genuinely dangerous. If someone constructs one using concrete that cracks and spalls under repeated thermal stress, or galvanized steel that releases toxic zinc fumes at high temperature, or if they ignore the proper clearance distances from combustible walls and floors, the result can be a genuine hazard. Every heating device ever built is only as safe as the person who builds and operates it. That is a legitimate concern, but the answer is not a blanket prohibition on the technology. The answer is a testing and permitting pathway designed for site-built thermal mass systems, the same way we already permit custom-built masonry fireplaces and chimneys in homes across the country. And slowly, that pathway is beginning to emerge. Some builders have successfully permitted their rocket mass heaters by classifying them under existing masonry heater codes, specifically ASTM E1602, the standard guide for the design and construction of solid fuel-burning masonry heaters. That standard does not require factory production or EPA certification. It requires compliance with specifications for materials, fire-resistant clearances, and chimney construction. Builders who approach their local code office and inquire about the permitting requirements for a masonry heater without ever mentioning the word rocket have in multiple documented cases received approval after inspectors witnessed the clean exhaust, measured the safe surface temperatures, and examined the solid construction for themselves. Insurance companies in Georgia, Vermont, and parts of Colorado have written homeowner policies covering properties with these systems when the builder could demonstrate compliance with masonry standards. It is not a revolution yet. The door is cracked open, not thrown wide, but the pressure is building. And it is coming from exactly the kind of people you would expect. People who heat their own homes, grow their own food, cut their own wood, and do not wait for permission from a government office to solve a problem that the system itself refuses to even acknowledge exists. Here is the detail that stays with me longer than any efficiency number or building code dispute. At a Buddhist temple called Chilbolsa in the mountains of southern Korea, monks once sat in deep meditation through brutal winters, warmed from below by stone floors that held heat for over a month from a single firing. The room was called Ajibong, and the secret of its extraordinary performance lay in the stone itself, mica, a naturally occurring mineral with such low thermal conductivity that it absorbed energy slowly and released it even more slowly, like a stone sponge that takes all week to dry. The channels beneath the floor were constructed with a precision that modern engineers can describe mathematically, but cannot quite replicate with their hands. When the Korean War destroyed that temple room in the early 1950s, the precise knowledge of how that floor was assembled, the exact angles of the flue passages, the specific thickness and arrangement of mica slabs, the carefully calculated distance between furnace and chimney, all of it went with it. Modern engineers and preservation specialists studied the ruins in the decades that followed, rebuilt the structure using the best techniques and materials available to them, and the very best they could achieve was a floor that stays warm for about 10 days in mild weather and roughly 3 days during the deep cold of a Korean winter. The original, built over 1,000 years ago by a monk with no engineering degree, no computer modeling software, and no government grant, held heat 3 to 4 times longer than anything we have managed to reproduce in the modern era. We are not smarter than the people who came before us. We just convinced ourselves that we were, and in that arrogance, we let the most efficient heating knowledge in human history slip through our fingers so quietly that most people alive today have never even heard of it. The rocket mass heater is one small attempt to claw some of that knowledge back. It combines the ancient wisdom of the Korean Ondol and the European kachelofen with a modern understanding of combustion physics, and it does it all for a few $100s in salvaged fire brick, a steel barrel, local clay, and a weekend of honest labor. The fact that you have to fight your own local government for the right to build one in your own living room tells you everything you need to know about where our priorities went sideways. And if this is your first time here, welcome. This is what we do. We go back and find the things that worked before the modern world decided it knew better. Pull up a chair and stay a while. If you found something worth remembering here today, leave a like, subscribe so you do not miss what comes next, and share it with someone who still believes the old ways knew a thing or two.